Hello, everyone. We mentioned in the last live session that that was not the last time you're going to hear from us. And here we are in the farewell pack, in this part where we are going to comment a little bit about some things we observe in the final presentations of both cohorts. Again, here we are not going to address specific things, but more like patterns that we saw common in some of the presentations. We saw a big commitment from the beginning of this cohort, going deeper into the exercises between live sessions, committing to crewing, and how this translated in also longer presentations, the thinking out loud, the aspects of vulnerability or accountability, but also the space that we need to be careful of, like, is this a process that I'm really willing to work on and take myself into, or am I saying this out loud to seek validation? As many of you already said in the presentation itself, that it is a lifelong process. So we are going to do some rounds of comments, starting with Anna.
Yeah, thank you, Luisa. Hello, everyone. I will pick up on what you said about the validation and the processes of change and the time that takes, but not use that as an excuse to stay in paralysis. I think watching the presentations, of course, each person is in a different is experiencing the course differently and it's changing differently. Decolonization doesn't happen as the same for everyone, and there's no checklist of anything. And we mentioned that continuously in the course. And I could see a lot of in what people shared around understanding not only a bit more about the processes of decolonization of the cell, but also understanding and connecting the dots and being able to see patterns in the industry, in cultures, and in their lives. But also understanding that the decolonizing process requiring a lot of time and space for integration and embodiment and reflection, and the course offers space for that. But the majority of the work is also needs to be done to practicing, right? To experimenting, to putting all the knowledge that you gain and all the reflections you made and all the dots you connected into practical experimentation. And through that, failing a lot, but then recommitting to this process of unlearning and staying accountable at the same time. So in the last session, I think I mentioned something about how change is the only constant in this process, and how the commitment to decolonization is much easier said than done, because it is a lifelong process, as you said, Lisa. So I think now, leaving the course, I saw in a lot of presentations kind of this reflecting on the role or what people want to do next, like trying to understand their own privileges, their own, okay, what is mine to do with all of this? So a lot of people specifically saying about addressing heritage confusion, some people mentioning about commitments to reparation, including land back or community support, or being involved in community activities. So this wish to experiment in their own context. And I really appreciate that. And I think that's kind of the next stage, because the course kind of offers this first intellectual understanding and space for you to do some activities within crews and support one another, but to understand what is yours to do only comes through experimenting in your own context. And I also appreciated seeing some people mentioning having the colonial journals or like spaces for commitment and recommitment to the process. So documenting to be able to come back and have conversations with your past self and having the space to recreate strategies and recommit to the purposes, which I think is also what the mural boards are for. And as usual, you are welcome to come back to it many, many times in the same way. And yeah, I think these were the initial thoughts I had and the things I most struck me when I watched the presentations, and I was trying to connect the dots between them or seeing what are the patterns that came up more and that called my attention.
Yeah, I think thinking about the final presentations and also a lot of the themes that have been brought up by expeditioners throughout the course itself, there's a very strong commitment to using the opportunity of the course, of the expedition, to try to go as deep as possible, as broad as possible, and try to reach as many different routes as possible to understand decolonization. So there was really this big intention from expeditioners about, taking that phrase seriously that we say constantly, which is that you get out as much as you put in. And we do see that also in the final presentations that this has been true. And I think that is down to, in many ways, our vetting process that has been honed to be very effective to create this highly, highly intentional, focused, and committed space of co-learning. But also, obviously, that the people who are involved, the expeditioners themselves, chose to really enter into a very supportive and active relationship with other members of their crew, other members of the cohorts, and really trying to get to grips and understand their own personal processes of decolonization, where, as we quite often talk about, you are also learning how it is that you learn in a context that you are completely unfamiliar with, which is a decolonial space that does not tolerate and does not promote certain perspectives and agendas because of the violence, historical violence, and ongoing violence around those very dangerous ways of thinking and designing and implementing. So the commitment to these concepts that are new, but also then what comes with that are the skills that are new. And I think we also saw this very strong awareness and continued conscious identification of where the skills are suddenly being practiced or not being practiced well enough, or it was very much something that I think, again, we didn't see this as much in previous cohorts. And so it struck us quite to some degree that people are being very conscious in this cohort about the skills that they're developing and where they feel that they need perhaps more support from their crew or for coaches, or that it is an ambition to continue to develop those skills. I think this part of it tends to be basically a big gap between the intellectual understanding and the skill building, because this is the gap that we're talking about in terms of building skill to take action, right? Building skill to be able to implement practice, building skill so as to create safer places, decolonial places that you can activate in your personal or professional life. So these ways of thinking about skills, I think, is also very comforting to see across the cohort. This is fairly consistent, and no matter where people are entering or exploring different aspects of decolonization, we see this approach to skills right the way across the cohort. In particular, related to roles, but I don't think only that, because there was also roles obviously outside of industry that people were very actively taking the skills development part on. For example, about how to handle or navigate personal relationships. This seemed to be a much bigger theme than in previous cohorts as well. But also this experimentation, the ego death, the concept of death that came up so much. This was also very new for us. It didn't happen before in previous cohorts, which we were really happy to see. And then this other aspect of the critical thinking part of it, the application of that within the interrogations of the entities as part of the exercise within the Sustainability Inc. leg of the expedition. This was, I think, the watershed moment for me personally as a navigator, understanding for the first time where people actually are in absorbing concepts of coloniality that we have been presenting up to that point and then actually applying it to industry. And in this particular cohort, those interrogations were extremely thorough and were very comprehensive in a way that was true to the learnings up to that point. And there were also a lot of elements of complexity that were addressed that I think we did not achieve in previous cohorts as well. So again, it's the commitment to crewing, it's the amount of time as well, the sheer amount of time that people put into their assessments to really try to reflect and practice the learnings that they had managed to accrue up to that point of the course, which I think was a chance, and that's all it is, right? The course is just a chance to be able to try to express the learnings in a way that feel true to you at that moment in time. And those opportunities are always going to be there. It's just whether you take the opportunity or not. So I think that's what I wanted to add about what really stood out for me in this cohort based on not only the final presentations, but also the other exercises as part of the expedition itself.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. The skilling up, the critical thinking, the intentionality of going through the process, and how this is combined with the importance of the ego death, that many people mention, and the grief that comes, and at the same time the importance of letting go and shedding. And I think through the quest itself, the many deaths we experienced through the identities that we thought that we were carrying, and how this also takes practice, and I think this is the combination between the critical thinking with the critical feeling of recognizing these patterns and recognizing where we are getting attached and where we need to shed. That was also mentioned in many of the presentations, of the importance of seeing this not only more clearly, but being able to identify these patterns where we get stuck. As Anna was saying before, this moment, this final moment, also gives a different light to the metaphors and the experience that we went through in this 5 months, and how important, if you're willing to continue to work on it, how it is a possibility to continue interrogating and making visible the things that you didn't see before and you can see now.
Yeah, for what you were saying, Liz, about the shedding, and what you mentioned, Sam, about the mentioning, more explicit mentioning of death, I was really happy to see that as well. It was the first time that it came up in the final presentations, and I consider this an evidence of how deeper people are able to go, because I think a standard procedure within, especially sustainability regeneration inc, that tends to have this positive view of wanting to do gooding and saving, and it's like trying to understand, incorporate the colonial perspectives into solutionism. Like So understanding this, what I can do now, what I can create, what are new things that I can contribute to without going through the much more difficult process of destroying also the harmful things inside and outside themselves. So I think this mentioning of death and grief and going through all of that gave me an impression that people are willing to go there and are going there and want to invest time in there. So I appreciate that a lot. And also per what Sam shared about the amount that people get out of it relates to how much time and effort was put into it. I also really appreciated how more creative the presentations were, how longer they were. So the commitment of people even learning new skills to be able to do their final presentations, experimenting on expressing themselves through different mediums, through different ways. So just wanted to also acknowledge that, and how many people mentioned about the importance of the metaphors. I think this was also the first time in the course that people mentioned during the sections themselves and in the last core presentations about how the metaphors inspired them to create their final course presentations and how the metaphors help them navigate the complexity of the content. And just appreciating that, because we ourselves know how much importance the metaphors have. Maybe they are the more important thing on the course for us, and we consider them like the amount of time that we take to do the videos is because we consider that really important. And that was the first time that I felt that the cohort understood that and valued that, because but I think it changes a bit, because when you start engaging with it, you're like, oh, I just want to get to the content. But then it reveals how much of that thinking of rushing into solutions is harmful, and how much knowledge there is through the embodiment of that content, through experiencing the metaphors and the stories. So yeah, I was really happy to see that manifesting in the share backs, in the final course presentations, how that was valued, because I really think that this is the most original and one of the most important things that we bring in the course itself.
I think there was also some moments where we could actually see very clearly the triggers for transformation. And by that, so one example that really stood out to me was, I think, one of the live sessions, probably around the Sustainability Inc. part, when Rachel had come out of a breakout room. And I think, the experience of the entire expedition for Rachel is just one that has a lot of conflicting emotions, and there's a lot of emotional labor going on her part, and also people who are supporting her, and I really appreciate that process. Coming to grips with, for example, the extent and the violence of British colonialism when not taught in school and not given access to that information for a lifetime, essentially. And then I think the comment that Rachel made, which seemed as though it was a very short and incomplete thought, but I think said a lot for me on this point of transformation. I think it was this sentiment that, after having spent time with you people having these discussions, how can I go back to ... And I think that was kind of where the sentence stopped, and like there was so many layers in that sharing for me that I really felt was also part of the collective momentum at that point in the cohort. where it was this epiphany after epiphany of how much we cannot go back, how much it's not possible for us to lie to ourselves to say that the old story can still apply, you know, because now it's poison, it's dangerous, and it's not something that we can try to justify, you know? So this is the mode of transformation that we talk about in some senses, in the kind of, I guess, mild sense. Once you see, you cannot unsee. But I think what we're really looking for and we're trying to facilitate in the design of this entire expedition is exactly what was expressed by Rachel in that moment. So for me, that was one of the standout moments of the course, and in many ways, I don't feel like I have to watch many of the final presentations to know that this continued to be very important and I think unshakable outcome of what folk actually take away as core to their experience of this expedition.
The combination of the content and the experience and the metaphors, how they allow people to embody this experience through their own context. That's so important. We have now arrived at the end of this expedition across the seas of fires and dragons. No one has asked how the visual metaphor upon which the entire mural has been designed. The spiral structure in the background of our final presentation mural is a mammalian cochlea. This is part of our inner ear, where sound waves are transduced into electrical impulses that the brain interprets into individual sound frequencies. The cochlea is the spiral vortex-like shape in our mammalian anatomy. And here it appears as a foundation metaphor as our quest ends. How have you been listening to yourself throughout this expedition? How have you been listening to each other? How have you been listening to those most harmed by colonization? And how does listening affect self-assessment and co-assessment? As you practice listening more deeply, question your own projections in what you are processing, and allow yourself time and space to feel critically. What do you notice that you need to practice more? Another anatomic curiosity you may not be aware of. Within our inner ears, the cochlea is connected to semicircular canals. The cochlea is responsible for hearing, while the semicircular canals are responsible for balance. Like the sandstone that gives us direction even in a dense fog, our inner ears help us to navigate with listening and balance through every position, posture, and movement. To make sense of the 3 dimensions we sense and exist within, we have 3 semicircular canals. These interconnected tubes are located in the innermost part of each ear and are called the horizontal, superior, and posterior semicircular canal. They are components of a bony labyrinth that are at right angles to each other. Dragon-like creatures, like lizards, have a slightly different anatomy. There are similar semicircular canals, but their cochlea is a bit different, and therefore perceive sound differently than mammals. Here, we realize the importance of the shared anatomies in hybrid creatures and acknowledge the inbuilt organ that we can pay more attention to and hone skills through. This practice helps us find balance while exploring and experimenting to avoid falling into coloniality's many traps. 3 dimensions and 3 semicircular canals. What do this signify to us? What have been the core elements of our expedition through the seas of fires and dragons? For us navigators, these core elements would be pain, confusion, and radicality. These are the cycles that we have experienced in developing the colonial skills in challenging and abolishing colonial systems. Pain is an obvious theme from the very beginning of this quest. Setting off from Blackwall Yard to explore development aggression and the core mechanisms of colonization, which includes ecocide, genocide, ethnocide, and epistemicide. Becoming aware of this pain and its presence, persistence and pervasiveness all around us is painful in itself. We learn to accept and laugh with the pain through our experiences of the micromanaging fly river turtles as we lamented structures within contemporary institutions as powerful and resourceful as the United Nations and the Gates Foundation. Grappling with the coloniality of the sustainability industry, acknowledging the distractions of the baby heads, and grieving planetary systems collapse and societal collapse as it has already come to pass. There is no shortage of pain in looking upon familiar systems and global dynamics with a decolonial perspective. Pain creates discomfort, oftentimes with an unbearable nature, that no matter how much one tries to tolerate it, one succumbs to it. And yet, it speaks to understanding, relationality, and respect as part of a resigned solidarity. Resigned to the realities around the limitations of our power within a colonial world order. Some pains cannot be avoided, like facing the death of a dear one, like the barnacle we once journeyed with. And still, some pains may be welcome, such as the pain of addressing privilege in working towards right relationship. It is dangerous and detrimental to avoid pain. This road leads to shutting down all your other emotions, and easily to an already very well-practiced pattern of dissociation. Dissociation comes in many forms, as an emotional detachment, a sense of numbness, a lack of interest, a sense of not knowing what makes you happy anymore, or even like panic attacks and anxiety swirls that make it harder to regulate emotions, trust, and develop intimacy. As a dragon-human hybrid, you are no longer afraid of pain. Pain is another lesson about care, about relational feeling, about being well and truly alive on a planet that colonization has unalived. Confusion has been an insidious beast throughout this expedition. A fantastical quest sought to help expeditioners identify, name, and befriend the low fog, the webs of power, the winds of fantasies and denials, these intangible, untouchable forces. Through the confusion, we somehow transform, or are forced to transform, from human to droplets of water, to tadpoles, to procorococcus, to mystical ceremonial seeds, and now to a dragon human creature who walks in two worlds. Confusion stems from lack of information or our inability to sense or understand, or even from intentional manipulation. Confusion in learning and unlearning is close friends with frustration. BFFs, surely, you hardly see them without each other. Entering a state of continuous learning requires joining the trios and becoming BFFs with both confusion and frustration. Intentionally practicing staying in healthy confusion and healthy frustration as part of a learning process is also about creating reliable systems of feedback and accountability. As you improve on your relationship with your new BFFs, you are going to become more capable of finding your ground and taking confident decisions, even in confusing situations. You start to quickly spot patterns that are actually unhealthy, such as those that bring more confusion, draining energy, time, and health, and what kinds of situations that are confusing but have more potential to become learning opportunities. The dimension of learning how to navigate confusion is a reminder to help you to attune yourself to find a new balance even when everything seems to be upside down. Radicality is the third core element of this quest that you, expeditioner, need to learn to nurture your own. That combined with embracing pain and navigating confusion will help you to develop your own inner compass. Radicality is nurtured when we focus on the question, what is vital in life? And what is vital in life that does not harm others? More than humans and humans. This is in a state of being and becoming more radical. Going back to these questions and reflections will support you to look at your own roots and root system so you can find appropriate care and nourishment within your context. The health of the roots are deeply connected to the health of the soil, as your radicality is deeply connected to your context, relationships, and practices. Listening, connecting to your roots might feel like connecting to your past, to your present, and to your possible future. When practicing to listen and feel radically, you might start to understand where you want to invest your energy in, or from where you need to disengage to keep relating with yourself and others from a space of health. From the beginning of this course, this fantastical quest is based in reality, as a way to support expeditioners to embody their learning and feel their own shedding and transformation in this process. The murals, the videos, and the floating and flying libraries are still available for you to go back and continue to practice your ways in these seas. But we also encourage you to continue to crew and experiment and interact on your own context. Practicing right relationships, centering decolonization, shedding coloniality, and listen to what was and has been erased to perpetuate coloniality. Now that you became a dragon expeditioner, you might encounter other dragon expeditioners from previous iterations in our refueling port sessions that happen quarterly. Keep an eye on your email inbox. Until next time.